Hello. In this series of tutorials, it's a little bit different. It's not on Max for a start, as you may have seen in from the playlist. This is on Unity, and I've got to confess, I haven't been using Unity terribly long, and I will put in the link below the tutorials I originally learnt from, because I think it's important to point that out. It's from the Walkerboy Studios. Very, very good series of tutorials. I think you need to have a little bit of back knowledge about scripting, just some basics in order to do them. But to be honest, very, very good, and I really recommend that you go over and you have a look at them. For the benefit of my students, and including yourself if you're watching this and you're not one of my students, I've decided to break it down just that little bit more into smaller chunks, because they tend to deliver it as a massive 40-minute deal, and it tends to get rushed through. And I've had some of my students working from them, and they tend to miss bits, and because of their lack of experience with scripting, they find it hard to fix it. So I figured I'd go through it a bit more step by step. So in this first video, we're going to start off just by looking at the interface for Unity. And when you boot it up, okay, this is what you should see. Okay, now you might also see, if you're first time loading up, you might see this window right here. Okay, and it might have all of these ticked. In my case, I've unticked these because I've been messing about, screwing about with stuff, doing little projects and stuff like that. So I've unticked these naturally. But for this, to explain what these are, is Unity does come with certain effects, certain pre-embedded scripts, I suppose, to allow you to do different things, such as light flares that you can see here, character controllers. These are things that you can use for free straight in your game. I'm using Unity Free, and some functionality is limited. You don't quite get the same stuff as Pro. Mostly what I've seen is it comes down to a few factors, but the main one that really stands out as being the key difference between the two is the lighting system, which is in the Pro version far more advanced. So if you're using Unity for rendering or anything like that, beauty shots, it's not the engine to use. Use UDK. If you're an environment artist or what, you wanting to make it look good in a game engine, use UDK. Dead easy to use as well. Very artist friendly. Unity is not on the face of things artist friendly. I mean, this is more of what a sort of game engine typically looks like, to be honest. At least the ones I've seen. It's got some things that I think are a little bit behind still. A bit behind the norm, but generally speaking, this engine is very, very good at making games. That's what it's been designed for, and it's really, really easy to do. So I've waffled on enough about that. Let's just get started with a little of this. For this bit, just to save the effort and make it less confusing, untick all of these. Okay, you won't need any of these to do this, or to do any of the little projects we're going to do. Okay, so untick all them, and once you've done that, you can change this here so it's a new project. Okay, so I'm going to make this, I'm going to save this somewhere else so it's not in the same location. I'm going to save it in a suitable place. Okay, let's save it in here. Should have had this bit prepared before, shouldn't I? Unity project. Okay, so that's there. Select folder, right, and then that will now put the projects within that file. So if we create it, okay, it'll reboot. Takes a second. Done. Okay, now we're back. Right, so this time we've got our project. If we have a look here, well, if we look up there, it says Unity project. That's exactly what we created. At the moment, though, it hasn't got anything in it, absolutely nothing. And the first port of call in Unity is to change the layout of the interface, because its default one is it's all right, I suppose, but there's better ways of laying it out. And the first thing I would say is to select the game one, and if you hold left click and drag, you can split it off, and that's the way the kind of Unity interface works as far as arrangement is concerned. So for example, with the hierarchy over here, click the tab, drag it, and we'll put that there. And what we'll do is we'll take the inspector and we'll pop that just below it there. Okay, and also let's take the console and put that down there. Right, project one we'll keep, but we'll move that down, squash it down a little bit. Okay, and just move that into there like that. So you can see you can arrange things quite easily by just moving the tabs around, and that's kind of the first thing to know about Unity, and is get a comfortable setup. Something that is easy for you to work in. I found this really great. It was pushed on those other tutorials, and I've made a few little changes just to kind of make it more comfortable for me. But by all means, you don't need to follow this setup. I've demonstrated this just as an example. Do it however you feel comfortable. The other thing we can do is over here. So this is where our assets display is. When obviously we have models in here, it's going to have everything in, whatever's in our project is going to be displayed. But this will have a sort of tiled layout when you have objects in here, which some people might like. It's nice and visual. Otherwise, I'm a bit more of a fan of one column layout, which will just give a giant list of what's in your project folders. However, for now, I'll keep it on two column, and I'll explain it later when we've got some stuff in the next video. I'll come back to that one. I just wanted to highlight it for now so that you know that we're coming back to that. Obviously, if you've used 3D software before, if we look in the main scene window, okay, and let's turn it's that one off, that's it, so we can see the grid. Okay, now the camera actions, rolling the mouse wheel like so. If you hold down the left click on the mouse, then that and Alt, sorry, then that will rotate the camera. So obviously controls are very similar to it's Maya in this case, but also it's fairly straightforward to switch between Macs. You just kind of have to remember it's not middle mouse wheel, and it's left click instead. So left click and Alt will allow you to rotate the camera. And if you want to pan, if you hold the middle mouse wheel button, and it is a button to remind you, then that will allow you to pan. So roll mouse wheel to zoom. Okay, and by the way, it starts jumping more the more you roll the mouse wheel. And Alt and left click to rotate, and the last one pan, just hold middle mouse wheel, and that is all there is to that. Okay, so there is also other things as well. For example, if you select on an object, like I've just selected on this camera here, if you press F, that will focus. Okay, so if I've moved the camera over here, as long as I've got that object selected, press F, there we go, it'll snap back to it. Another way of seeing all the objects in your scene is up here in the hierarchy. This will display all the objects in your scene. So whereas this displays all the objects in your project, right, that doesn't necessarily mean they're in game. This just means that it will show you what objects or what textures, or, so on and so forth, or scripts are available to you. But however, this will show you what is actually in the current scene. Right, there's lots of little settings up here to switch between a textured wireframe and so on and so forth. I will come back to that one when there's actually we get a model in there and we can have a look at that. But there's no point demonstrating that at the moment because you won't be able to see anything at all. Same with this one. Not really beneficial unless you can actually see what's going on. But obviously, RGB is the main one we're looking at. Color, alphas, it will just highlight it by transparency. Overdraw, it will no clipping, and bitmaps is bitmaps is the texture distance. So basically, it reduces it over time. I mean, that's something to go into more when we're studying 3D, and obviously we're not in this, and we don't really need to at this point. So I won't go into that in any more depth than I have to. But light on and off, skybox. This toggles if you've got anything in there. Typically, if you're working from scratch, obviously it's only going to hide the grid. Sound goes without saying, okay, and gizmos as well. So you can have different, you can hide things, for example. So if you had a light, you can hide that. Cameras, gizmos, and everything like that as well. So I mean, these are kind of useful. I've never had to tweak them. It's not really any point. If you want to switch things on and off very quickly, then it's good to know about. And yeah, there you go. So you can see little gizmo, which is on and off. Don't know why you would need to. I mean, if you don't want it on, just don't select it, but still. Here we have the directional, a bit like, I mean, this looks exactly like Maya, to be honest. It looks exactly like it, but obviously in a similar fashion to Max's one as well, except it works better than Max's one. If we want certain directions, so it says right there, front, obviously top, okay, and you've got the other ones as well, bottom. And if you want to get back to perspective, you just tap that there, and that's now back in perspective. Oh, actually, it's still in ISO. There we go, now it's in perspective. No, ooh. Okay. I did know that, but I'd forgot I did that. So yeah, you can switch between. I don't know why you'd ever want to work in isometric view. I said this on one of my Max tutorials, but I do know people out there love it. I'm not sure why. Obviously, these are, if you're working isometric, work from, true sides. So for example, this is perspective back really. If you tap it again, I'll go back because I've accidentally gone too far. You tap it again, there we go. So you just tap the middle to switch it between. So you can see that now we're in proper isometric view and not this kind of perspective sort of one, which is quite horrible. But I suppose if you quickly want to look around it, then yeah, it's quite nice. It functions well as a gizmo. Anyway, right, there's that sorted. Other than that, it's very straightforward. We've got select, obviously, a move tool, and rotate, and scale. Very straightforward. The type of pivot moves from center, or a local, so it depends on, obviously, where the pivot is placed on, if you've got a model. Most of the default ones in Unity are, of course, at the center. Across the top here, we have the typical one, file, build settings, build and run. This is stuff that's going to be used later on. Save scenes. Okay, so everything obviously operates in different scenes within Unity. Which, if you've used Flash before, then this is probably going to be a doddle because it'll a lot of principles cross over from that. New project, open project, save project. If you wanted to open a different project, of course, there we go. You can do that, or you can create a new one. And the other one, save project. So these ones we'll go into more when it comes to it, and it will in a few tutorials time. In edit, obviously we've got typical options again, project settings and render settings, things you might want to tweak. I haven't had to touch them. This is interesting. Obviously, if you're working on different platforms, then especially if you're using networking, for example, then it gives you emulation options, so you can test it in different settings to make sure the game's working. I love that. I've been playing around a lot with Android stuff and the Ouya and that, and I've been tweaking a lot of these settings just to kind of get a feel for it, I suppose, and see how it performs. It's interesting results. It performs quite well. We've also got the snap settings as well. You can snap it to certain points in the grid if you've got certain setups that you quite like. Never used it, but there it is for you if you do intend to. Game objects. This is where you can create default objects within it. It's kind of like primitives, really. That you get in like Max and Maya. So we can create an empty one, which is kind of just like an empty shell, which is useful if you're creating sockets or nodes, if you are slightly familiar with game engines. If not, then all in due time we will talk about that. Create other particle systems. You can create. I mean, it's fairly self-explanatory. I mean, if you look through it, it's quite obvious. I mean, if I create a cube, there's the cube, and as you can see in the hierarchy, it's in there. It is very, very straightforward. In components as well, these ones are some more advanced systems, and stuff like this you will end up using. These kind of plug mostly into the objects themselves. So if I select an object, you can see that now I can add them. So that, in fact, here's an example really. You'll see in here in mesh renderer, on here mesh renderer, and that's what allows the cube to be visible. I mean, if you turn that off, it's no longer visible. It wouldn't be visible in game. So that's what allows it to be visible. So everything works in components. It's all very straightforward and all very nice. I think that's what I love about Unity. That's what makes it so easy to make a game with. It's all so clean, and in comparison to like Max's interface and Maya's interface, this is awesome. If only a 3D program was like this. So yeah, I mean, apart from that, Windows, different types of Windows, all good. The best thing about Unity, by far, is its support. So we're going to have a look at that soon. It's really good. I'll show you that later on. But yeah, I mean, it's got fantastic support, which makes it even easier again to build for games, because there's just so much out there. Obviously, you've got to pick your poison, whether you're doing JavaScript or C#. Very easy to cross over to each. Most people start with JavaScript, which is what I'll be starting with in these tutorials, and then cross over into C# later on, because it's a very easy transition. We've got play, pause, and we've also got I can't remember what that one is now. I think that was the next scene bit or next action. I can't remember what that is. I've never used it. I've only ever used play and pause. It's never been needed. If anyone has ever used it, please drop a comment, because I've never had the need for it. So if there is something that's useful about that, then please let me know. Obviously, the game view. If we press play, it puts it in game mode. You can change the colour of this to kind of let you know it's in game mode, because to point this out, if you make any changes, so for example, I'm going to move this here, and you can see that there's the cube. If I move that there, and then I turn off game mode, it snaps it back. So it's kind of important to make the colour something that stands out, so you know it's in game mode, because any changes you make, and whether it's in settings or anything, will just revert back the moment you turn it off. I mean, that's more for debugging. You can change settings and move things around, see if it works, and if it doesn't, just stop the game and it'll snap back. Just remember that, bear that in mind. In order to change that, if I remember rightly, it's in preferences and it's in colours. There it is, play mode tint. So you can change it in there. I'm quite happy with the red, so I'm not going to change it, but very straightforward to do. Obviously, you can change the colours of other things as well. It's all very nice, you see. It's just nicely laid out. The menu system's not very complicated either. So yeah. And
that is almost it. We're getting there now. So over here, when we laid this out, if you want to save the layout, you can do that here. So you just go save layout. So let's say, for example, my layout. Okay, not very imaginative, but save that. And then that will save that for future use. Okay, so you can switch between full split or, a default 2x3. That's kind of alright, but I've got different ones depending on what sort of size screen I'm using. So small screen, big screen. You kind of get the idea. I'm going to go back to my layout for now. I quite like that. And there we go. That's all there is to that. So as I said, with the hierarchy, you can create other ways. So with game objects bit, create other. You can do that straight from the hierarchy menu here, which is nice and quick. As it's, they've repeated themselves, but they repeat themselves for a good reason. To try and speed things up a little bit. And that's what it's all about. I'm just going to create another object. Let's just drop a sphere in. Okay, remove that, and notice that the gizmo is very much the same. You can move along Z, you can move along X, you can move along Y, and then rotate. Exactly the same story. Okay, very, very, very similar. And the outer one there, just do it on whatever view you're on. It kind of works in groups a bit. So obviously, if you want to make something connected, so if you want to, let's say I wanted to move this cube, but I wanted this sphere to move at the same time, you can make the sphere by just left click and drag selecting it onto the cube, a child of cube. So if I move cube, sphere also moves as well. So that'll become more significant later on. And if you want to get it, break that, if you want it to not be a child anymore, then you just drag select it off and it no longer is a child. So that's worth remembering. We'll go more into this afterwards, later on with the camera. We've got the inspector. Now you're going to spend an awful lot of time in here. This is where all your variables, all your little settings for individual objects are stored, and it's where you can make all the changes. So for example, you can see, if I roll that up here, transform, if I put that as 100, it's probably gone way off into the distance. Press F to find it. There it is. So it's gone quite a distance. You can change the settings and move them accordingly. So fairly easy enough. Rotate scale as well, so you could change the scale manually by numbers. These ones, we'll go a little bit more into these. Same with the texture stuff. That's in fact what we're going to come to in a video shortly. And there's other things like tags and layers, but as I said, functionality wise, we'll get to this. Preview. This will preview the model. You switch just to see if things are all right. And down here, the console. If you're debugging, if you've got errors or anything like that, it will show it up here. So you could print text to screen, and it will show up in here. Let's say, for example, I wanted to click on this ball, and I wanted it to then say, to check that it's done that, it will say, yeah, you've clicked on the ball. Then you could do that, and it would show it in here. But it would be purely for debug reasons, just getting the game working. But also errors show up in here, and you can limit the errors you see by turning these on and off. So this one's just the comments one. This one's warnings. So generally, most people will ignore this and just clean it up later on, because it's not a game breaking. These aren't game breaking problems. This one now, on the other hand, is a game breaking problem. If any of these come up, then you have a big issue. Anyhow, I think that more or less covers it, I would say. Yeah, I'd definitely say so. One last quick thing. If you're importing anything, which I'll show you a bit, if you right click on the assets bit, then you can do that. Also down here with create, is different than hierarchy create. This is where you create folders, you can create your scripts, materials, so on and so forth. And I will go into this more obviously in future tutorials, but definitely for now, folders is worth a look at. And in fact, you can see now how this kind of works. So it's not too bad, I suppose. But we'll come back to that. So I'm going to delete that for now, just by pressing the delete key, and it's gone. Anyway, that concludes the first tutorial. There are obviously little other things, things that I will look at as we go along, but that's the basic gist of it, really. Any questions, just drop them, and I'll try and get back to you whenever I can. Right, thank you, and bye.